everybody, and welcome to Live the African Dream podcast. Today, our guest is Axel Peyriere. Did I say that right?
That's fine, that's okay. I know it's complicated. It's French.
Awesome. Well, Axel Peyriere is an entrepreneur, an angel investor, and the founding partner of Emerging Classified Ventures. He has worked, mentored, coached, partnered, and invested in more than 200 startups around the world. We are super excited to have Axel today. Welcome to our podcast. May you give like a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so you'll guess with my accent, but I'm French. I've been based in Australia for the last 10 years. Despite the French accent in English, they still gave me the citizenship, so I'm French-Australian now. And I've been a lot, just to make it simple, working with startups in emerging markets. So a lot in Asia at the beginning, being based in Australia was much closer. And then a lot with emerging markets in Africa and startups in Africa. And I am on both sides of the table as an entrepreneur myself. So we've been building and operating online marketplaces in emerging markets with Emerging Classified Ventures. Mostly on the automotive side and a bit on the real estate one. And I'm as well an investor, being an angel investor or being a syndicate lead to invest in startups in these economies, and a lot in Africa over the last 5 years. So really happy to be discussing about that with you. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've had a conversation before in the past. Tu parles français, je suis camerounaise, vous êtes français. So we might add a little bit of French throughout this podcast today, but you're currently in Côte d'Ivoire, which is exciting.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing a little bit why you're in Côte d'Ivoire right now?
Yes, so and French, yes, is important because obviously it's one of the biggest spoken languages on the continent there, and the biggest French city, by the way, French-speaking city in the world is not in France, or it's Kinshasa in Congo. So French obviously is a big asset. So I can use my big French accent in English or my just French. Speaking here, so that's a good thing. And basically, yes, I'm here. So in Abidjan, West Africa, Francophone West Africa, a bit like this, a bit smaller market than those giants or the big giant that you have almost next door with Nigeria. And Abidjan and Ivory Coast is obviously amazing, very welcoming people, great country, lots of very nice places to go to in Abidjan, outside of Abidjan, etc. And I'm here for basically two things. First, I'm working on this automotive marketplace that we have here. So we have automotive marketplaces in all countries in sub-Saharan Africa, all the 45 countries there. So and here in Côte d'Ivoire, it's called Voiture. .ci with an S at the end of voiture, so which means cars.ci almost. And so we are setting up a bigger team here on the ground to do more things and basically to bring and to solve a few things in that space in the used car market. So and at the same time I'm obviously scouting and looking at some very nice interesting startups on the ground in Abidjan, in Ivory Coast or in the region, and I'm connecting with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of investors and shakers and doers, as we say, of the ecosystem here. So and that's great. I've met a lot of very interesting stories. So lots of things happening.
Awesome. Well, I think you mentioned earlier in the introduction that you're French and Australian, right? And I am curious, you're very involved in the African tech ecosystem. You're one of the few people on LinkedIn that is constantly speaking about the market, how things are going, VC funding. I'm curious, what drives your passion? Like, why Africa or even just emerging market as a whole?
So, I've been born and raised in France, in Paris. The first time I took a plane I was 18 years old, and now I'm taking planes every month, all the time. And just before COVID, traveled about almost 20 countries in 1 year. So, I think for me, traveling is exotic. and that's how you grow. You learn a lot about different cultures, people, languages, history, and things like that. And Africa is full of that. Obviously, there's a lot of different cultures. There's a lot of different, obviously, people, passionating stories, etc. So I guess a mix between. I've been in the tech space since the last 20 years. Back then in France, plus after in Australia. So mixing all that together, yeah, I think that's what drives my interest in African startup. Plus, I started an automotive marketplace in Congo, Kinshasa, a few years ago with a friend, Congolese friend that I met in France, and that's it. It gave me a bit the bug of startups in Africa. And as things has evolved a lot in the last few years, yeah, the more you do it, just the more you do it, your network is expanding naturally, and that's it. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And I think I say this a lot on like every single episode, which is something around the sense of, like you are not, like African because you were born in Africa, right? Like, you drive a passion for Africa because Africa was born in you. And it's cheesy. I think I've heard it somewhere. I don't know where. But it's something that I have to keep reminding myself every time I speak with amazing people. So,
And at the end of the day, what I like about that is, we are all Africans. So what we are sure of is that mankind started there. So some moved north, some moved west, south, or stayed around, and that's it. So I think there's something that is attracting you on the continent for various reasons, depending on people. So that's it. And then when you see what's happening in the tech space there, all the opportunities due to those big demographies and fast-growing economies, it's amazing. So I prefer to take the risk, as we can say, on the markets rather than to take a big risk on innovation in Europe or in US, etc., where you have to innovate hard. Here, you need to be a bit more bullish, I would say, a bit more optimistic on the market. That's the risk you're taking.
okay, awesome. Well, let's dive right in. Let's talk a little bit about the market right now. It is obvious that globally, I mean, in the US, in Asia, there's technically a VC funding slowdown, right? And just given the amount of VC funding that has been going into Africa, it doesn't seem the same thing is happening. Yes, we've seen a slowdown a little bit in VC funding in April and May, but it's still way much higher, right, than what African startup founders raised last year. And from the outlook of things on LinkedIn, you don't seem to think that a global downturn will affect African startup. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think there's a mix of things there. There's some true things and some wrong stuff as well. So obviously, level of investments in startups in Africa, we're talking about $4.5 to $5 billion last year, 2021, which was a crazy year because money was free, interest rates were low around the world. So there's been a lot of money injected in tech startups around the world. But if you compare to some fundraising, for example, in Europe, or those big guys in quick commerce and things like that, like Gorillas, Flink, etc., they raise like 1 billion plus each. So all of the startups in Africa with publicly available numbers raised like 4 to 5 billion. So that's relatively low. And then I think there's basically more and more appetite from angels, smaller VCs and bigger VCs. Now you see all the Tiger Global and all these type of VCs investing on the continent. So this year, my guess is that it's already like up to end of May, like plus 130% compared to last year. So it's more than double. So it will probably be almost close to 10 billion this year. Once again, still relatively low compared to the US, compared to Europe. And that's where basically is the main difference. There's more startups, there's more bigger rounds as well. There's more scale-ups, etc. So all of that combined, there's basically a better atmosphere, at least, on the VC space, on the investment space, than in the other markets. There's been too much money put into the startup space in the US, in Europe, etc. recently. So things need to be a bit more reasonable. While here there's still this huge room for growth. And at the same time, once again, speaking about Ivory Coast again, this year will be probably 7-8% GDP growth, more than China. Last year was more than China as well, etc. So I think, we need to see the continent and the markets there from a different perspective. Yeah, there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the rate at which the African tech ecosystem is growing is crazy,
That's it.
and like, and we have seen that. You mentioned a little bit the 5 billion VC funding going into startups last year. But I also know that you have been investing in the African ecosystem for a few years now. Will you mind sharing a little bit about just, how the African ecosystem has grown over the last couple of years?
I think everything is, the biggest question I have from friends, colleagues, and partners who are looking to invest in these markets is it safe? And I think there's a lot that has been done around that. So once again, a big assumption that is wrong is that, yes, you're investing in African startups, but from a legal standpoint, you're investing in a US company. Most of these startups are based in Delaware, etc. I would say like almost all of them, some maybe in Mauritius, some in Singapore, some in Canada or in London, but like 90% something in the US. So from a risk perspective, it's as safe as to invest in a US entity. And then those companies or those holding companies in the US will hold entities in operating countries: Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, whatever. And what I've seen over the last few years is that now I see a lot of early stage entrepreneurs in Africa. All of this is already done and ready. So you don't need anymore to tell them like, okay, you should set up a holding entity in the Delaware or whatever. No, everything is already done. And they're quite early stage. So they've already spent like 5-6K dollars to set up that. So things are clean. So from a due diligence perspective as well, it's much cleaner, much faster. Then you're back onto the business model itself, financial model, the economics, etc. So and this has changed quite a lot since COVID, since when was that again? 2020. So
2020?
yeah, already we miss it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it was so long away. Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
great. I think you mentioned like a great point, right? I think a lot of investors always, I would say they hold back when you mention, hey, invest in Africa. And I do the same thing. I always tell them like, hey, like you're actually investing. I'm based in the US. I have a US fund. All my investment needs to have Delaware C Corp. So you're technically investing in a US company. The only difference is that this company is growing and scaling across Africa, if not even globally. But I think you mentioned one point, right? I think one of the questions that I have for you is how can African startups better position themselves to take advantages of opportunities in the global market? One of the big ones is, again, already registering in the US, but like what are other things they can do to better position themselves?
I think, I see a lot of those entrepreneurs like they're full of ambition, etc. So they want to tackle other markets than just their own market. But I think, it's if you already address these markets well, the potential is enormous. Look at those guys like Flutterwave, Cheaper Cash, Interswitch, all these guys there. They are huge. They have been Cheaper Cash grew from a $10 million valuation 3 years ago or something like that to 3 or something billion now. So that's it. So I would rather tell them like focus on your market first, get it right, try in other markets around, get it right, but think you're an African startup, think about Africa because there's already so much to address there that's enough, Asian population, especially China, will decrease by the end of the century. India will plateau. Europe will decrease a bit, aging population, not enough fertility rate, and things like that. Africa will grow tremendously. Africa will be the only place on earth where there will be what we call those megacities, like 100 million people cities. Lagos, Kinshasa, Dar es Salaam will be the ones, like 80 to 100 million people city only. So that's it. The potential is just there, you know. Nigeria will probably be, I think, 800 million by the end of the century. Congo 400, things like that. So it's huge. So there's enough opportunity just to focus on those markets first. So don't put, like I recommend to those founders, don't add any other markets in there. Even if you can maybe address some of their problems, but yeah, better to focus and get it right here first.
Yeah. I mean, that's great advice. And I think one thing that a lot of founders don't think a lot about is the government and politics, right? Like, even though Africa, we're all Africans, right? Every country has different policies and a lot of things that varies from country to country. I think like one of the big questions that I'm always curious about is the role of the African government in supporting and promoting entrepreneurship in the tech ecosystem. What are your thoughts on just, like what are some things that the government can do to really help the tech ecosystem grow and scale across the continent?
I think, on that, there's no perfect solution. Even, it took a bit of time for Europe, Asia, etc., to find a good balance between supporting and or starting to support startups, etc., and where they are now. Things will happen with time. I think, Africa is more and more stable. There's still a bit of political issues there and there, obviously, but there are political issues outside of Africa as well, as we can see at the moment. So, and instability, etc. So yes, with internet, it brings transparency, it brings a bit of more trust. Things will continue to be better and better, and then government will start to support as long as they understand that there's obviously an incentive for them as well. I think a country that understood it well, which is relatively small, but compared with what they are doing, is Rwanda. Rwanda, they are really supporting and being, it's a small market. They will always be a smaller country. It will never be that big as Nigeria from a population or geographical perspective. So 11 million people, but it's a mix between French speakers and English speakers. It's centrally positioned. I think their baseline is the heart of Africa, which it's really the case. And they're trying to attract a lot of entrepreneurs to have a base there. For African operation, it's very, very nice cities, very safe, and they're supporting with incubators, hubs, accelerators, bringing as well leaders in the tech space from other places. There's Norsken, for example, that is coming from Sweden, and they've been building a big hub there. All these things, so it's happening more and more. You see that in a lot of other markets. There's more and more co-working spaces, so the ecosystem is taking shape. If you look once again at France a few years back, there was not all the Station F and all these big places and etc. So things takes time. Once it starts, after there's a virtuous circle that even the politics, despite the differences from a country to another, will want to address and to support. Yeah. If it's driving business, they will support. It's always that, as long as there's business, there's always, and that's the goal at the end. You want those startups to drive more business for individuals, small merchants, etc.
Yeah, definitely create jobs, improve the economy
Exactly.
and a lot of other things. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think you mentioned this a little bit during your answer, which was, there are a lot of accelerators and incubators that are coming on the continent. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that we need more accelerators and incubators, or do we just need more money?
It depends on how far they go in the process. This morning I was discussing with the founder of Africa Works, for example. Africa Works is kind of, I would say, the WeWork for Africa. We had a time where it was the Airbnb for this or for that in startup decks. I think here it's interesting to have the this or that for Africa. So, for example, if you want to expand in the various countries at the moment, finding co-working space there and there is not that easy. While here, obviously, they are set up in different countries, so you can go from a place to another easily. You have the same setup, the same system, and then the same thing kind of applies on the accelerators, incubators, etc. Seed Stars, for example, have been doing a great job over the years with their startup challenge, going from a country to another. That created a bit of link between those markets, bringing the small market a bit on top compared to only having the big ones always pushed, that's it. And then there's all those economic zones as well, UMOA, etc., that will be a bit more, I think, address this with maybe some joint venture kind of answers to that. Different countries having similar kind of programs, etc. That's how, for example, Francophone West Africa can, be interesting from a startup perspective and from an investor's perspective as well. Because all together, that they make a bigger market, a bigger zone, and then it starts to become interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and let's go a little bit more personal. I know your thesis at Emerging Classified Ventures is mainly focused around SaaS-enabled online marketplaces in early-stage emerging markets for both real estate and automotive industries. Why such a specific thesis, or like sector?
So here we are more like a startup studio rather than a pure investor on Emerging Classified Ventures. So we've been building, growing, and operating our own marketplaces with co-founders that we have found in those different markets. That's it. While on the other side, with my kind of angel investor hat, I'm more a bit agnostic in terms of sectors, industries, and geographies. So, but I'm still trying as well to go out of the classic fintech in Nigeria thing, because most of the money that has been raised recently was from a percentage perspective, from a ratio perspective, fintech in Nigeria. Then comes Kenya, then comes Egypt and South Africa as well. South Africa, which is a bit decreasing because of, I think there's a lot of local issues, etc., that need to be addressed. But yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. That's amazing. So I know you've angel invested in a lot of African tech companies. You've mentored, you've advised, and you have a thesis around some of the companies for your venture studios, but it seems like you're a little bit more sector agnostic when it just comes to angel investments. What are some advice you can give to founders that are looking to raise money, especially from angel investors, which is super early stage? Like, what are some good advice you will give them when they're thinking about fundraising from angel investors?
I think the best advice, I'm using those two words as an entrepreneur on my entrepreneur side or as an investor, is the two main words are trust and transparency. As much as possible as you can be transparent and there's the trust relationship that you can establish, then that's it. For me, that's what I'm looking at with founders I'm supporting. I need obviously to trust them. Numbers are numbers, etc. So you need to trust them. And for me, as an angel as well, I need to be convinced as well that yes, they want to go for the big goal, for the big objective there, and to really change or fix a big problem in these or those markets over the long term, So after a good pitch deck, obviously everything ready, data room ready, due diligence that can be done very quickly, etc., etc. But yeah.
Okay, like quick question. What kind of due diligence will you regularly do on an African tech company to make sure that it's a good investment?
Different things, obviously, company structure, business plan, financial model, already looking at companies that already have a bit of traction, client, and revenue, and then doing cross-reference check. I experienced this recently where the cross-reference was not that good, and obviously that was a pass on the opportunity. But yeah, mixing all that together, putting as less as possible as emotion or affect, even if sometimes you really like the founder for a reason or another. But yeah, to be as much as possible pragmatic and yeah.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Moi, on va changer un peu en français. Je vais essayer parce que my French is not the best. I tend to mix words. But the whole goal of the Live the African Dream podcast is for us to be able to share some amazing individuals, right, that are very involved in the African ecosystem, whether it being as founders, investors, or just, innovators. Je voudrais savoir quel est ton rêve africain. Pourquoi l'Afrique? Vraiment, qu'est-ce qui t'inspire? And all the in-betweens.
French or English?
French.
Alors, je pense qu'au final, c'est voilà, de continuer à découvrir et à apprendre de plus en plus sur ces marchés. Et puis au final, moi je m'aperçois aujourd'hui qu'en fait, j'ai beaucoup de choses à apprendre sur l'évolution des technologies dans ces marchés. Par exemple, le mobile money, c'est pas quelque chose qu'on utilise en France ou en Europe. Donc c'est vrai que quand je suis arrivé ici les premières fois pour utiliser des solutions de mobile money, voilà, j'étais un peu perdu entre guillemets avec toutes ces histoires de code, etc. Voilà, maintenant, alors que ici c'est très naturel en fait. Donc voilà, je pense l'African Dream au final, African Dream at the end, it's like I think 21st century will be much different than the 20th and 19th century, obviously. And from a demographic growth perspective, that would be a lot the African century. So that's it. You can see that in the music as well. In the US, you have a lot of Nigerian singers, very popular on the charts, etc. Nollywood is a bit more and more popular as well. So, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. Well, actually, it was such a pleasure having you on today's podcast. You've been an amazing contributor to the African tech ecosystem. I've really enjoyed following your journey from the day that I learned about you, and I really wish you all the best of luck with all your startups and investment ventures. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Eunice. Have a good day and have a great week.